Around my house?
No, Coyote and Santa Ana.
Oh, I haven't checked.
Guys ready to roll?
Deer too.
Santa Ana. They were running good. There was water everywhere, man. Couldn't believe it.
Okay, let's call to order the Ojai Basin Groundwater Management Agency meeting. Today is Tuesday, December 4th, 2018. It is 5 o'clock, and we're in the council chambers for the Ojai City Hall. Can I get a roll call, please?
Richard Hages.
Here.
Johnny Johnston.
Here.
Russ Baggerly.
Here.
Dan Breen.
Here?
And please note Jim Finch is absent.
Can I rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Late.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag
Of the
United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, item 3, director announcements and reports. No reports from the mutuals, other than my particular water company is still fixing a pump that we blew up. Fortunately, it was a backup pump, so it's not a problem for us right now. We're still using our own water. Anything from the Conservation District? Jim is not here tonight. Anything from the City of Ojai?
No.
Nothing from the City of Ojai. Anything from the, I guess now what we have is the Community Facilities District and the Casitas Municipal Water District. We'll start with Casitas, please.
Okay. The lake level on November 29th was 30.4% full. That's 72,278 acre feet. On, let's see, when did it change? The day after that it rained, and it went up to 30.5%, and it stays there. The elevation is 481.35, which equals 72,513 acre feet. And it's going to rain probably tonight and tomorrow and Thursday.
Okay, and which stage drought are you currently in?
We're in stage 3 so far.
Okay.
And that is actually something that the board is going to have to look at, is how we're going to shift from 4 to 3, and then if it goes back down again, are we going to change everything and go back to 4? That's a policy decision that has not been made yet, and I'm going to bring it up at the next meeting on the 12th, because it's something we need to figure out how to do since we're on the verge of declaring stage 4.
Any other updates from Casitas?
No, that's it.
All right, Mr. Aegis, anything from the Community Facilities District?
No, no, I don't have anything.
Okay, and the agenda item, you'll note in item 3 are the, where the current wells are, their status. And the most recent reports are reported from November 9th. In the bottom right hand, if anyone likes to review them, they are in the agenda.
And we made changes because the previous mutuals.
I was going to ask about that. Can I get a quick understanding? It seems like we got a new mutual or lost a mutual. What's going on here? Did you?
Their San Antonio number 4 was down.
Oh, okay.
Has been down.
All right.
So, I emailed the board and Jordan, and he said it would be okay to, substitute
That's what, okay.
because they're very close to.
So the Gorman well is substituting for well number?
San Antonio number 4.
From,
Now they're all in there. They're just giving me all of them.
okay, all right.
Where is that in the agenda?
Page, it's labeled as number 3, right behind the actual agenda. Okay, item number 4, we do not have,
Can I,
yes, sir.
before we move on to the next agenda item, I'd like to suggest that we have an addition to the agenda, and that's board member comments. That would be board members that want to see something put on the agenda or make an announcement or those kinds of things.
Fine. So we want to put that before we have our basin status report, or?
No, not tonight, we'll do it.
But just going forward?
Yeah.
So that we know where we want to put that?
Sure.
Okay. All right, so this is board member comments going forward. We are missing Mr. Kier tonight. Is that planned?
I looked at my email today, I'm not in the OBGMA office, but,
I haven't heard from him.
yes, I didn't hear it.
Okay, well, then we will not have a report regarding our current basin today, unless anybody has some information that I am unaware of.
Well, we'll just,
Can I have a question about the item 3 over here?
Yes, sir.
It's for 9/6/2018. That's the static at 320 and the dynamic at 176. Does that sound right? Just looking at all the others, or is it reversed?
It's reversed.
It's reversed, okay, so it needs to be corrected.
Thank
call
you
Larry, thank you.
for paying attention, public. Thank you very much for bringing that to our attention. We're gonna have to pay more attention to this stuff. We got smart folks out there looking over what we're doing here.
Yes.
All right, so anyway, certainly going to add on going forward board member comments. We don't have a basin status report this afternoon or this evening, which leads us to public comments on items not appearing on the agenda. Is there any comments from the public from items not on the agenda? As you've noted, if you've watched any of our meetings, I'm more than happy to entertain any questions at pretty much any point here when the board is done speaking. So if you want to, if there's a question going forward and it's on the agenda, I'm more than happy to listen, more than happy to take your inquiry, okay? All right, on to item 6, consent items. A would be to approve the minutes from October 25th, 2018.
So moved.
Second.
First from Mayor Johnston and a second from Director Baggerly. Roll call, please.
Johnny Johnston,
Yeah.
Richard Hages,
Yes.
Russ Baggerly,
Yes.
Dan Green.
Yes. On the action items, we're also now on 7A to review the treasurer's report from October and November 2018, both the budget spreadsheet and the extraction charges. I think we have a new extraction charges was handed to all of us. The thing I'll note on the extraction charges is on the right-hand side, way, way, way at the bottom where it says acre feet, 3,600, 3.37. That is very, very close to our projections for what we're looking at that year, right?
Yeah, when I did the cost of service analysis, we did a projection of about 3,750 acre feet, so we're not too far off.
So we're working with some numbers that we're using that are working based on how much water we're pulling out, extracting, and then what we see here is, as a result of that, our revenue numbers are going to be slightly lower than the projections, but well within a percentage range that we can live with.
The conservation is good.
It means conservation is good, yes. That means we use less water than we had planned, and it's again down from the prior year, which was 3,825 acre feet.
And when I think 3 years ago, the pumpers, people were pumping about 5,000 acre feet out of the basin, so
we're doing
a significant
We're
reduction.
seeing reductions. And as a result of that, we're seeing reductions in revenue, which is a result of the fact that we raised our rates in order to maintain our budget. That's another conversation.
Do we have any idea how much Casitas water was served over the basin for the same period?
I can look it up for you.
Yeah, it'd be good to know. Actually, it'd be a good thing to have as part of this report and give us an idea of the total demand.
That consumption report comes out once a month, and I'll have to figure out where it is.
So the question you're asking specifically is,
Is how much Casitas water was delivered over the basin for the same period?
over the 10/1/17 to 9/30/18 period?
Yes, yes.
Oh, I won't have it that finite. It'll be monthly, and it may
Yes.
coincide and it may not.
But we can certainly start gathering that data and having the answer to that question.
Hmm.
So let's go ahead and add that onto our list of things to do, and more information the better.
Is the leak in the Arbolada been patched, Russ? Are you familiar with the fact
I'm
that-
not.
Yeah, for a couple of days it was running up there.
Oh, and
That would add to
Del
the
Norte, yeah.
consumption.
probably will.
Well, Del Norte is right where the basin, is it inside the basin?
Someone's water leaking, so it's gotta get
I
fixed.
think it was on this side of the street.
Oh, then it is.
All right.
Dan,
Yes, sir.
on that same line, is Casita still supplementing, the community facilities district water with lake water like they were a few months ago?
They always have.
All well water.
They always have. They're working toward zero draw from the lake by going through all the wells that they own and making them work better. But it's about 130 acre feet a month. I'll find it for you in a minute.
Supplemental or pumped?
It's pumped from the distribution, from the treatment plant, 7 zones into the area. That's the only way it could come. It's pumped, yes.
So the question is the difference between what was taken out of the groundwater and what was supplemented by the lake? Added in by the lake.
The previous purveyor, got 30% of the water from the lake.
That's correct? I believe that's correct.
70% from the wells.
Yeah, in July, there were 174 acre feet used, or sent to the Ojai area, and in August, it was 175 acre feet.
And that's to the Ojai area or to the community facilities district?
That's one and the same.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Yeah, it's coming down. It really is. Not too long ago, it was like 300 acre feet, and
And we're not seeing an increase in the use of well water, so someone's not using water, which is good.
right.
Anyway, back to the agenda item, which is the treasurer's report.
Look at that.
Any comments, additions, questions about the treasurer's report? Right. Motion to accept as presented.
So moved.
Second.
First and second, can I get a roll call, please?
Director Johnston,
Yes.
Director Hayes,
Yes.
Director Baggerly.
Yeah, I have one question, though. On the treasurer's report period, November 2018, in the last item on expenditures is office support. Can you make that a little bit more specific next time, okay?
Yes.
Thank you.
So with that, you are a
I'm
yes,
good, yeah.
and I am a yes.
Okay.
All right, moving on to 7B, the general manager's work plan.
I'd like to suggest, I didn't really get a lot of updates on that for you tonight, but I think the focus that I'd like to maintain tonight and a lot of your discussion at your October 25th meeting was on the work plan objectives. And that's really the next item, because ultimately we need to ferret those out, define them in more detail. What you said at your last meeting, you wanted to have we wanted to look at the relationship between the perch zone and the lower aquifer, and we needed to put a work plan together for that. And then the other was a conjunctive use agreement.
Yeah, and we have that on the agenda for later, for an update.
Right, so, I think, so I'd suggest holding off on this work plan, because I think there's gonna be a whole lot of things in discussion that's gonna cause it to change.
Oh, well, before you,
Okay,
before you move
please.
on. I didn't see on there this agency tracking the in-stream flow study for the
Oh, yeah.
Water Resources Control Board. So I think you ought to add that to your list someplace. It probably shouldn't be more than quarterly, because they're moving very slow on the whole issue. You agree, John?
Yeah, you're talking about the gauge for the,
No, that's a separate issue. We're talking about the in-stream flow study that the State
study,
Water
I'm
Resources
sorry, yeah.
Control Board is visiting upon
Right.
5 rivers in the state of California.
As an addition to the work plan, or an addition for a monitoring issue for him?
Yeah,
All right, thank you.
but it's not every month. I mean, quarterly would probably be enough. That's my recommendation. And since I don't have board comments, I'm going to add something else that's not really related to his work plan, but is something that the board ought to be aware of.
Okay.
There's a person sitting in the audience tonight, Roger Essick, who has informed me that the low-flow channel at in San Antonio Creek at Grand Avenue, which is the trigger point for getting the San Antonio Creek Spreading Grounds diversion facility to work, is in the wrong spot. It's diverting water away from the gauge, so it's not giving us a fair chance to get the water working.
Diverted, yeah.
So we need to figure out how to motivate the county, the Watershed Protection District, to go out and have a look at that and figure out how to fix it.
Is that a phone call from me? Is that a letter from us? What is that?
Well, I think I could start with a phone call to Elizabeth Martinez, who was the person that went through this whole process with us. She was quite a young lady when this whole thing started, and this was quite stressful for her, I'll tell you. I'm just kidding. But let me start with a phone call with Elizabeth, and I'll see if I can get the ball going on that.
All right, so we'll look for, okay,
A report next month.
sounds great.
And Peter, at some point, we're probably going to need an update on the adjudication. It doesn't have to be every month, but when something important is going to happen, we should know.
I think that's on
Okay.
there. Item 1A.
Is it?
So, Mr. Mundy, back to your work plan.
Okay.
And let's let that, are you
Oh.
good there? Are you,
Well, yeah, I read that wrong. That should be the City of Ventura adjudication.
Yes.
Instead of the Channel Keeper, because they got blindsided. Anyway, I think that's all I had.
okay.
No, actually, there isn't. For the what do you call them, the objectives, John? We're gonna have to deal with actual conservation measures to put into the plan. We talk about conservation measures, but we haven't really done anything about it. So I have a list of things, and I'll pass them on to you that we could do. That's, sorry it took so much time.
No. It's get it on a list so we can all and try and attempt to get it off the list.
I know we haven't sent out a lot of detailed information, but there were, a couple of years ago, last year or two, we have sent things to pumpers requesting their support and helping to conserve water, but I don't think we specifically gave them
Well, that's-
recommendations, so.
That's coming with the conjunctive use agreement. When we get that closer to reality, there will be letters going out to the pumpers after well, we'll get to that later. So what do you want us to do with this?
I would ask that we hold off on the work plan because I think there's a lot more discussion that needs to be done relating to the groundwater management plan objectives. And once those are better defined and if they're modified, then I think we can update this. But I still see this as at least an initial guidance document for me.
You bet.
And I don't necessarily have to have the board approve it as it stands. I just need to know that you're comfortable with me working toward these items. And as you bring up things, as we get into the basin objectives, then that'll help steer some of these items on an updated basis.
I believe we've approved the list. The issue is just an issue of priority.
Priority, exactly, and that was the other item we talked about last meeting. was
So there's
priority.
no need for us to approve, but we do need to prioritize.
Yeah, we do need to prioritize.
Okay, so for right now, you believe the priority then should be on the groundwater management plans objectives 1 through 5, which is the next item, agenda item 7C?
Yes, and as I said earlier, I think the relationship in the basin between the surface flow and the the aquifer itself was one of those items that seemed to be a priority, and you wanted a work plan to put together for that. And
Actually,
and the conjunctive use.
Feel free.
yeah, it actually was more than that, John. We, in our groundwater management plan, we commit to studying it and defining it more closely because it's very important to us.
Understood.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we need an action plan for that, so we can get that, and I know that that's a top priority for us as part of that. So how are we going to get to that place where you're presenting us a plan and we're saying go and do it?
I'm sorry, bear with me.
Not a problem.
Well, I think, I'm probably gonna need to sit down with Jordan, and we're gonna have to map this out and figure out exactly what kind of work that's gonna take.
Okay.
He's probably gonna do the bulk of that, I would imagine. I'll support him where I can, but let me contact him and figure out how we start putting a work plan together for that particular objective.
What is the name of what are we gonna call this project so that I know how to reference it? What are we gonna call this, Russ? Well, Nanu to you too, but what are we gonna call it?
No, it's actually the difference between the perched aquifers and the deeper aquifers.
Yeah.
So the surface
So
flow
the-
test?
It's what are we gonna call it? The continuity with flow to San Antonio Creek.
Something I can put on an agenda item that we can understand.
Flow, we'll come up with something, but
All right.
let me, perch flow, basin, aquifer. and
Point
we'll-
I'm making
and
is that
we'll-
I want to see that on the agenda every time we have one of these meetings and keep updated. That's why I was trying to get a name for it.
There,
There we go.
there he is.
There he is.
Just in time not to
May-
have this
Maybe he'll have a
conversation.
better name. Yeah.
One of the
Just
things,
in time.
one of the things we discussed at the last meeting was the budget, which we haven't done anything on, I assume.
I take full responsibility for that.
Good.
Well, yeah, it's good.
For one, having supposed to do it, and two, not having called you to have that appointment and do that. So,
Well, two of the items related to this is that Jordan was going to come up with an estimate to do a feasibility study on the PERG zone recharge and look at developing a work plan so that we could get ahead of the game on potential funding. I know you just sat down, but
No, that's okay. And apologies for my tardiness on that. But right to that point, part of our efforts today were at the Steelhead Restoration Focus Group, whatever it was. We went on a series of tours with them up and down the watershed, and my boots are all wet from walking through said water. But those are some of the funding agencies that we were meeting with today that would fund the Wildlife Conservation Board grant that has that work plan in it. So I think for the, while I don't have a specific scope and budget prepared today for the board here, we do have that within that Wildlife Conservation Board grant application. So we'll refer you to that and then refine in the coming days for this board.
so we're going to see that at the next meeting then?
Correct.
All right, and then what are we calling this?
This is the perched aquifer study plan feasibility study.
Don't try to figure out an acronym for that,
Perch
please.
aquifer feasibility study.
Yes.
The word perfs is almost in there. Okay, so then we'll put that on the agenda for the next time, plus no, this is not the same thing you were talking about.
Yes, it
correct?
is, the
Okay,
very
so
same.
now we have a name for it?
We do have a
All
name.
right, so it's going to be on the agenda next time. I want to keep it on the agenda until we have an answer, and it's off the agenda and the project is completed.
And Dan?
Yes,
can
sir.
we go back a step? Russ, how long is, when you were referring to the trigger point being relocated, how long ago did that start? Trying to deal with the watershed?
Trigger point
You
relocated.
talked about out at Grand and,
The meter, the meter at the
You know, when did that,
gauge?
the Thalweg or the low flow channel for the creek can change with every storm.
right.
So I don't know when it happened, but it's not, it's moving away, it's moving toward the east, I think. Isn't it, Roger?
Part of the problem is there's a slot in the middle of the creek, and the water, obviously the stream doesn't care where the slot is. It deposits rocks, and they just need to maintain it so that it flows
Yeah.
through the slot and not to either side.
Yeah, okay.
Probably
So
half the flow this
concrete.
last storm was going to the west.
Concrete slot
Is that where the gauge is, near the slot?
Correct.
It's in the slot.
It's in the slot.
Well, we don't need the Corps of Engineers to go out there and clean that out. I mean, I can go out and do that.
Right, but the way you described it, it sounded like this was a long-suffering problem. Is that true? Or were you?
Well, it's suffering enough that we're not getting any diversion because the trigger point's not working.
It happened last year also.
Do what?
Same problem last year.
Yeah, okay, so it's
It's
a
maintenance, I guess.
episodic
You're
maintenance
still gonna make a
problem?
call then to Elizabeth
Is it-
and see if they're
yeah.
gonna maintain it then?
Yeah.
All right. Otherwise, we're gonna see you out there with cleaning it yourself.
Yes.
All right. Thanks,
You
Russ.
have insurance, right?
Thanks, Russ. And this has been an ongoing issue. We finally get the spreading grounds built. We finally get some rain, and then the bypass doesn't work, or the gauge is in the wrong place. It allows us for the bypass. It's glad we got to the place where we have this problem. It's a champagne problem, so to speak. We can't fix it, so let's make that call and see what we can do about it. Yes.
Would the board be interested in pictures? Maybe I just go up there and take some pictures, and we could show those at a meeting, so you can kind
It
of get a
would-
flavor of what it looks like.
Might help the viewing public to get a better
Public
handle on what
too,
we're talking about. Yeah, and how little.
Actually, we've seen it many times in Jordan's presentations.
Yeah,
Perhaps I haven't noticed
but
it
you've had
for
a
what
board
it is.
turnover.
Yeah.
The reason my question is just simply what, how strong is our argument, or I'll be seeing Mr. Pratt very shortly, the Public Works Director, and I would bring it to his attention, but I'd like to know, if I'm going to say it's taken a while, you made reference to somebody who was a very young person who.
That was the person that was running the permit for the
Right.
Spreading Grounds project years ago.
Right.
Elizabeth Martinez. And you can start at the top if you want, but we can probably get some movement if I contact
Okay, well,
Elizabeth.
okay, that's fine.
Long story short, Mother Nature's working against us on this, and someone's gonna go out there all the time and make it right, and it's either gonna have to be the county or us, otherwise we're never gonna get the benefit of having that gauge there.
The city of Ventura loves it because all the water's going downstream, and we're not being able to divert anything.
So let us know what Pratt has to say, and let us know what Ms. Martinez has to say when we see her next.
Gotcha.
I'll leave it alone. I just was curious, so I would.
No, don't leave it alone, ask Pratt, feel free. Not gonna hurt. At least we can say we asked. When the next time the public comes and says, why isn't it working? At least we can say,
I'm just trying to know whose responsibility and how long it had been going on, and you're just saying that it does happen occasionally because nature moves it around and they don't come up and check on it. Apparently, we don't report it in or something.
that
Right.
sounds like
Or if
appropriate.
they give us authority to what's that?
Okay, so anyway, we've got the percolation aquifer plan feasibility study that's gonna stay on our agenda. We're going to get some photos and figure out this gauge issue so we can get the benefit of water flow when we see rain coming. Where else, John, do you wanna go then with items 1 through 5 on item 7C on the agenda?
Well, I'm thinking, it would be helpful for the board to look over these management plan objectives. I know they were developed, they were put in the plan. Jordan did the majority of the work on this, if not 99.9% of it, I think. He certainly got a little help here or there, but he put this together. But I think it's important, since there's been new members on the board since a lot of this was developed, and the world changes. I think it'd be good to have maybe another ad hoc committee of a couple of board members to sit down and go through this and find out, is this what you want as far as your management plan objectives? Are you satisfied with this is adequate? Do you want additional? Do you think something needs to be taken out of this? It's quite detailed, but what we don't have attached to this is really kind of priorities and timing.
Okay.
So,
The groundwater management plan is a lot like a general plan for a city or county.
Yeah.
It's general. We can make things more specific and have some regulatory teeth in it through ordinance or resolution. And we need to figure out those things that we want to beef up through this process.
'Cause,
I
you
do
know,
have-
I can go ahead and move forward and, you know, Jordan can and we can all work on this, but I guess I'd like to know, what is the board's real priorities? What do you want us to focus on? Because I don't want to go out and do a bunch of work and
Yeah.
then you say, oh, no, we don't want you doing that.
Yeah, I think it would be good to be able to set some priorities in the various categories, specific tasks, things that we would look for assistance in or funding in, and not just kind of let all that come to us and let them decide what we're going to do first. I mean, considering some of the other issues that we're going to be dealing with on a watershed, some of these are far more important than others. I think some areas are far more important than others. You know, I think this perch zone study is extremely important, and, you know, anything that enhances recharge is extremely important. So trying to develop some specific tasks that we can put our teeth into, I think would be worthwhile.
Just so that you know, if you're looking in on us from the video or you're here, you know, this is what we're talking about are 5 objectives that we have in our management plan. Understanding the basin hydrology would be the first one. The second one being protect and manage the basin. The third one being encourage supporting activities. Fourth being communication. Fifth being administer the basin efficiently. Obviously, you know, administering the basin is just a function of our funding and keeping track of what we do as an agency. We do an okay job with that, I believe. As far as communicating, I think we can always do a better job updating our web pages and getting, you know, better documents together. But neither of those last two ultimately put more water in the ground or ultimately result in less water being used. So clearly, you know, the emphasis is going to have to be on that, which those first 3 objectives. We're a small agency, so we've got to, you know, pick what we want to go after. And if, you know, I get a lot of folks coming up to me and asking questions about what are you doing about groundwater, and the reminder obviously is objective 4 communications. We don't create water, we manage water. So the answer is always, you know, we're doing what we're supposed to do. We're trying to manage, we're monitoring that water, understanding what that water is, where it goes, making sure that our abandoned wells are proper, keeping everybody registered, and being a source of information so that when we do identify projects we want to go after, we have a good set of data, we have a place to go to get that information. So that's always the problem we have, is what do we do once we get these plans together, and then how do we put meat to it?
Yeah.
And that's, you know, that's not unique to this particular agency.
And since we do an annual report, it'd be nice to be able to have some focus each year and then be able to report in that annual report our progress is on these
Yeah.
priorities.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if we just look at objective 1, this is probably one of the most critical right now in trying to develop as much information as we can, particularly on influences on surface flow.
Want to make a suggestion? I didn't mean to interrupt you, sorry.
That's all right.
Make a suggestion. You and I already have a budget meeting that I've already committed to, and I believe that Mr. Monday is part of that budget meeting. Was that correct? Why don't we take that same meeting, and then the 3 of us, crutch through this, bring back solid action items that we want after reviewing both this plan and the projects that Mr. Money's put together, as us come back with this and then actually have something always on the agenda that we're taking a piece out of every time that we meet and know that we're going to get something succeeded here. Does that sound like a way to go here?
Sure.
Any other thoughts on that? Any applause from the audience for having a way to go here? Any thoughts on that? Okay, well then that's where we're going to go unless there's any other objections to that. And I take full responsibility for not having done the budget meeting. My business world has been crazy lately, but I will find time and I'll make it a priority. You have plenty going on, and so does the mayor. So the 2 of us will dig out some time and bring something back.
Okay, I've got a question.
Yes, sir.
Underneath Table 1, Storage and Action Table, the last paragraph on the page and the last sentence, it says principal monitoring thresholds will include, and we turn the page and it's well location, well performance.
We're missing a page.
Is there something missing there? Okay, look for the table.
Yeah, there's no
Table
page
1.
numbers on here, so look for the table.
That's right. Now, the last paragraph and the last sentence. Principal monitoring thresholds will include, and then we turn the page, and it's, I don't know if these are really important monitoring thresholds, except the peak water level in June.
It's like something's missing, I think.
Do you think something's missing?
I don't have my non-amended copy with me.
Yeah, I need to check the source documents here, but we can certainly discuss that because it really jumps ahead to item 8C.
Yeah.
Because we put a lot of those into the storage and action in the conjunctive use approach. But just to bullet list them, things like precipitation, conditions of spreading water, past calendar years basin lows or highs.
That sounds more like thresholds to me, yeah.
What the trend is, what the key well depth to water spring high was, what the past calendar year fall low was, as well as what the conditions of Lake Casitas were, how much they were able to divert in a given year, things of that nature.
And he's gonna repeat that same speech, when we get to.
In about 2 seconds.
In about 2 seconds.
Yeah. So note then that we need to pull whatever this conjunctive use language talks about into this document right here, because this is not adequate. All right. Any other comments then on 7C? Well, we'll be bringing back a review, prioritizing our objectives and getting them on the agenda and leaving them there until they're done.
And everybody can participate. Johnny, if you think you know something that needs to be done, please email it to Dan or Richard or John.
Yeah. And same with the public. If you guys got something that you believe is a priority, I'm open for input, and input's good. All right, moving then on to the discussion items, the water meter installation requirements. How did this get back to us?
Well, let me tell you what's the board over the last year or two has been talking about meters and getting meters
mandating for everybody, as opposed to the some of us
mandated
that
meters,
have. Okay.
and also there's the testing and validation of their accuracy, those kind of things. Well, the reason this is before you, because there was an ordinance passed in May of 2015, Ordinance 10, that mandated having requiring testing and calibration of meters. You also have an ordinance that requires meters, so I didn't really bring that into play, but what we did with this ordinance, it didn't define the actual activities related to testing. That was left up within the ordinance, said you're going to do that by resolution. And so what you've got in your agenda is a resolution that spoke to that. And it was adopted by the board in that same year, 2015. There was a target date of June, I think, of 2016 to make sure everybody got noticed and got tested, and we got all that information, and for some reason, and I don't know what happened, I was kind of on hiatus for a little bit or something, or missed the meeting, but the board kind of put that on hold at the time. And so I think it's time to revisit that issue and decide, does the board want to move forward with this, and what time frame would you like? It's going to take quite a while to get all this done. You need to give people plenty of notice so that they have an opportunity, and we need to figure out, well, who's out there that can do meter testing for people. And then there's some requirements within this that says meters that are 3/4 and 1 inch are tested every 5 years, and everybody else with the larger meters gets tested every 2 years. And is that still comfortable and adequate for the board and for what you think the community is willing to accept?
Who's paying for this?
Well owner.
Well, you're looking at it.
The well owner or us?
Well, ultimately, the well owner has to pay for all the facilities that go in, but there's a cost by the OBGMA for monitoring and inspection and things of that nature.
But the cost of the test.
The cost of the test, the cost of installation of the meter, anything else related to that is all on the well owners.
Well, it might be helpful if we could contact some companies that do this and get an idea what it costs first. I mean, if it's extraordinary, doing it every 2 years is,
Can we send this proposal to a qualified person that does this and have them give us an estimate of the cost of fulfilling the obligations of this resolution and then determine whether or not where we want to go from there?
Yeah, I just don't even know if anybody's available. so
Mr.
that's-
Essex.
I have a comment on this. I think the first thing to do would be to get in contact with Fox Canyon, maybe have John talk to them directly. They've had a lot of awful experience with this, and it's really difficult, and it is expensive. And I'm not sure, I'm not up to date on what they're doing. I'm not sure they're still doing it, because they're going to a whole nother philosophy of, they're gonna remotely monitor everybody's,
Yeah.
you know, and maybe there's grant money to do that, and that might be even a better way to go than to,
So they essentially just replaced every meter by doing a remote monitor, right?
yes,
So they don't need the
most of
resolution.
them. There are some that will work, but most of them won't.
Yeah, and I don't even know if they're using mechanical meters at all on that, or.
No, they're not.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
No. So you could learn a lot by talking to them and their experience,
Right.
and they had a list of the
Testers.
testers, and also you could check with them on how often they were requiring it to be done, because they did at least made an initial round and went through and had everybody do it, I think, but,
Well, when we put this together, this resolution, we did look at the Fox Canyon resolution
yeah.
at the time.
And they've had a lot of experience since then,
Yeah.
so I think it would be,
Negative, right?
Yeah.
yes, we don't want to have the same experience. We'd like to have a better experience.
well, some of these, the testing is so expensive, it may be less expensive to replace the meter with something better that we could monitor.
Well, that's true. See, that's what I'm getting at. And
Yeah.
there could very well be grant money available to do something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think they got some money to do that. I don't know if it was enough to do all the meters, but they're still in the process of making that conversion.
So you were on the board when this got passed, right?
Yeah.
Why did you pass this?
It wasn't my fault.
What was the background?
I
Not
was
you. I meant you collectively, not you individually.
I was
Sorry, I
against it.
apologize.
No,
I
well,
apologize. You
because-
collectively. What was the
No,
thought?
well,
What was going on?
It actually makes sense on the surface, because you don't want somebody out there with a meter that's off by 20%, you know? And they're more likely to be slow than fast.
Okay,
But
but
they
this-
could
but
be
the-
either. So we passed it, but then we, I think, came to the realization that we weren't ready to implement it because of what we're talking about right now. We weren't sure how to do it. And so we never really came up with it. But there was pressure from various sources these should be tested.
Even in light of the fact that the Fox thing was done in 2009, we already knew there was problems?
Yeah.
All right, just want to make sure.
But I think, yeah.
Well, the fundamental principle was that we want to know how much water is extracted from the
Yeah, no,
from the
we
basin.
want to get an answer to this
You want
question.
an accurate number.
Yeah.
Mr. Kier.
Yes, so part of what, to this end, and kind of to bring this back to a question that was asked of us a while ago, the Wayne Erickson, Wayne Cooper Agricultural Services, they'll test a well for about $450, calibrated with an ultrasonic flow meter, figure out, they're sort of the PG&E or Edison tester types du jour, and we use them for wells from time to time. But at $450 a pop, that can be pretty pricey for 100 and some odd wells in the basin.
Right.
So what we did is we requested prices from ultrasonic flow meter vendors and got the following prices. For a meter that is 1.5 inches and below, it's a $790 item.
Thank you.
For a meter that fits a pipe 1.5 to 2.5 inches diameter, it's a $1,500 item.
Ooh.
For a 2.5 to 3.5 inch diameter pipe, the ultrasonic flow meter is $2,500. For a 3.5 to 6 inch meter, it's a $4,000 item, and for a 6 to 8 inch meter, it's a $5,000 item. So this is the kind of thing that could be taken from well to well and spot checked to correct, not necessarily calibrate, but have a correction factor on the meter reporting that an individual pumper produces for the agency. We've considered purchasing a couple of these for our private fleet. And so what I'm getting at is if the agency did want to entertain the idea of purchasing a meter that could be dedicated to half a dozen wells, or in a given month, where we could take the meter that belongs to the agency, check the calibration or check the meter that is used for reporting, see if it's high or low, or spot on. That's the kind of thing that we can do. But those are the kind of costs that we're looking at. Just to recap, an individual tester is about $500 per well. And if we were to purchase one of these, let's say in the 2.5 to 3.5 inch diameter range, which is many of the wells in question, it's a $2,500 item, which if you put that in 5 wells and use it, it would pay for itself in that 5 well span. But food for thought.
I'd like to expand a little bit. I'm assuming that's just the equipment cost.
Correct.
And then you'd have to have installation cost on top of that. The other thing you keep in mind, when I worked for municipalities, we didn't really spend a lot of time and effort on small meters because they're just not worth it. No. And so generally we didn't test small meters, 3/4 inch, 1 inch meters, even up to 1.5. You didn't test those. You kind of just figured they were going to last 10 to 15 years, maybe 20 if you're lucky. If it breaks, you replace it because it's a $125 item. And so that's the other part of this. Why do you want to test a $100 meter when it's $500? And so that's something to consider in thinking about all this. And so maybe 5 years is too often, and maybe you say you want to have a meter replaced or tested every 10 or 15 years if it's below a certain threshold. The agencies that I worked for and managed, we really focused on the larger meters. And so you're talking about your 2 and your 3 and your 4 inch and your 6 inch meters, because that's where you get the biggest sales of your water, and you're going to have your biggest losses on revenue. And so typically the large meters, 4 to 6 inch, usually got tested every 2 years. The 3 and 4 inch maybe every 5 years. So just to kind of give you a feel what municipalities kind of go through. And Richard's probably got some thought on that.
Yeah, I think that, you're going to have to look at, see what the bang for the buck we would get out of doing this. If it's a retail sales meter, you try to make it as accurate as you possibly can. And like John said, those smaller meters, they rarely go below 96% accuracy. I mean, even when they're in there for 20 years. Typically, municipalities just replace them on a rotating basis rather than test them. My experience, we didn't test anything over 2 inch. 3 inch or 2.5, 3 and above, we would test, depending on how much water the customer used, we would test those on a regular basis because that's a significant amount of water. The other thing is in a resale meter, you have to test this range from 1 gallon a minute to the maximum capacity of the meter. And typically on a well, they're running in a pretty narrow range all the time. So if you know what that range is, you can do a quick test to find out how accurate it is. I just don't know I don't know how much how much accuracy in the scheme of things we're really losing. If there's some big production wells, I mean, it's like Casitas operates some fairly substantial wells now that, that should be metered. I mean, they want to meter them too, just to keep their inventory straight. But for a 2 inch meter, depending on what kind it is, I mean, if it's a typical 2 inch propeller type meter, I mean, unless it breaks, that's really the biggest problem, is when they stick or they completely malfunction and then you're not recording anything. That we should keep a handle on. If nothing else, a physical inspection, just to make sure the wheel's spinning on it every, some periodically.
Did Casitas, when you guys took over the water company, did you guys put a meter on? Is there a meter on those wells?
I think there are.
All right.
Yeah,
When it got bought as part of the due diligence, did anybody see if those meters were right to really figure out what they were buying, or do we not know?
There wasn't much that was right.
All right. So have you subsequently, since now you own that company, done a test for those meters so you can figure out your books?
I can't answer that. I don't follow that kind of,
Who can answer that question for us?
the general manager.
All right, will you ask him, or should I ask him?
I'll ask him.
All right, because this makes no sense, to your point, we should probably turn this on its head and focus on our large water users and make that part of what we're trying to accomplish here, and stop wasting our time on the smaller water users that are, de minimis, frankly, from a cost standpoint. Yes, sir.
Peter, is there any guidance in or from Sigma on whether or not this is a requirement, or from DWR or from the state board that you're aware of?
I'm not aware specifically. I could look at that for sure. But it's, I think, been stated that it's important to understand, how much water you're dealing with. And so even if it's not required, it's, a good idea.
It is a good idea, but, if we do not require the de minimis, smaller meters to get checked, we could require them to be changed
Yeah, we could have a replacement.
at a replacement
program.
policy,
Yeah.
just to make sure that they're running correctly. That wouldn't eliminate them at all from our view. It would still give us the possibility of making sure that the smaller meters are running faithfully.
Yeah, I don't think we have to abandon this. We're not doing anything right now. So if we start out with our priority being having the largest meters tested and make sure they're operating properly, and let's see what we get from that, and then move to the next size.
Okay, so how do we identify what our largest meters are, figure out the cost of going after those, and then keeping track of what additional water we found because of the variances and whether or not it was worth it to do that exercise?
Well, and I think we'd like to put together some information that says not only these are large meters, but they make up X percent of the total
Right.
water pumped out of the basin.
Right.
And if it's 90% of the water, that's where you need to focus.
Yeah.
How are you defining a large meter? Is it more than 3 inches, 6 inches?
Primarily, right now, we're discussing if, actually, we're talking large meter, but really we're talking about how much water you actually use and push through any meter. Right?
Yeah, the volume per year.
We're
would
talking
be
about
the-
volume issue, less of a,
That's fine, but just right now, what do you consider a large meter?
Well, my experience,
Maybe you don't have an opinion, I don't know.
I
Mr.
don't
Lundy.
know. I don't
my
know
experience
what
has
they
been
do.
3 inch and up is kind of your larger
Yeah.
meters.
Yeah, I doubt if there's any, well, there could be sonic meters that are larger than 4, but I wouldn't imagine there's too many out there.
These ones I just described are ultrasonic meters.
Yeah.
Come on up, Larry.
yeah, feel free. Yeah.
I think this is a complicated question, and it affects all of the pumpers. And,
Good.
and I think there was a lot of good, I had nothing to do with this, obviously, because I wasn't at that meeting, or I would have said something. But I think that.
Well, lots of disclaimers here.
I think that the intent is very good, but the guidelines that are issued here, like every 2 years, to have somebody go out and to have to recheck their meter, and some of these issues, if you don't have the ultrasonic, they need to take the meter out and send it to Hemet. I think John and I were talking about that. It may be out of service for a whole month. What's it going to do if the meter's out of service for a whole month? And the turnaround for doing this is very slow, I understand. And so this really needs to be looked at. And before anything is done, I would just like to suggest that not just the board look at this, but any interested people in the public look
Sure.
at this, so that we can make our own comments to the board. And I don't know how you would submit this, but I'm sure it would be easy to do.
That's
But-
always possible,
But
Larry.
it's very important, because the guidelines here, I'm just speaking on behalf of the pumpers, because I'm a pumper, and the guidelines here are a little, I think, out of whack, and I think some of them are onerous, and even some of the language that they talk about attorney's fees, to pay the actual cost. I mean, that could get very expensive, couldn't it, Mr. Candy? Anyway, I said enough.
I think,
Thanks, Larry.
My best suggestion is, when we get to the point, to rework this, if we get to that
Yeah.
point, before there's enforcement.
That's what we're talking about doing.
To
is
get
reworking
it out to the public first.
Yeah.
Well, that's why we're bringing this forward tonight, because it does need revision. And I think we need to focus, because of the limited resources of the agency, we need to focus, where do we get the biggest bang for our work? And so I'll work with Ms. Vanderveer, and we'll get some information about the biggest.
Yeah, let's pick a random number. So let's
Productions
just go
and-
with, how many users are using 60% of our water, right? So it's 60% of our water, how many of those users how many account for 60%? And we'll figure out, and we'll start there, and then we can figure out what that looks like. So 60%.
It may be based on size and/or water use. I think
Exactly.
those are things to look at.
Casitas, you can come back to us next meeting and let us know when part of the due diligence for acquiring those wells were the meters checked? What was done as part of that? So because if you guys have already checked your meters and you know you're good, everybody here knows you're a large water user, so a lot of the problem might already have been resolved for us.
Well, we had a complete study done of the well field, so I'm sure that information is available.
So a lot of what we're, I don't know what percentage of our water use comes from those wells offhand, but it's not, can we
About
figure
a
it out?
third.
So if we know,
That's how much for that period.
call it a third, and it looks a third-ish,
Yeah.
so that's a third of the problem. If you can come back to us with an answer next time and say, hey, we already did those wells, so we know they're good.
Yeah.
I'll be more than happy to put our company up for a test for water, to have our meter checked. I've got no issues with that at all. It was installed new 18 years now. We've not calibrated it, so I'll be more than happy to put ours up. We're not a huge user, but we are a user. And then go down that route. But I got a feeling that when we get our numbers back about who's using 60% of our water, it's going to be wells we already know about that we might have already calibrated, and which makes this problem smaller.
I want to go back to SGMA just for a minute. As I recall, there is a provision in SGMA that does require metering. However, it also, as I recall, if you have 2 acre-feet or less, it's considered de minimis and you don't have to be metered. But in talking with Mr. Candy, he said the board, you need to follow SGMA, but you can also follow your own rules, as I recall the discussion. Maybe that's too simplified, but
Yeah, when I said I wasn't aware of anything in SGMA that dealt specifically with this, I'm talking about the details that we're
Yes,
dealing with
correct.
here on this level. Certainly, meters are discussed in SGMA, and envision that's going to be the basis for, figuring out how much water is coming out of the basin, of each one of the basins that are subject to SGMA. But this is a higher level of detail. How do you implement the program, to make sure that it works properly? And I think it's within your authority to make those decisions, but,
Yeah. SGMA doesn't get into this detail.
No, but John, the meters on the smaller wells, they may publish a useful life for the meter.
Yeah, there might be some recommended guidance as to,
Yeah.
for
It needs to
your
be
de minimis
replaced,
users,
right?
if their meters.
do, yes.
X number of years, it might be good practices to ask them to replace something
We
like that.
can get that information together.
Yeah.
All right, so on this item, then, we're going to have numbers come back to us regarding our use against percentage. We're going to have Casitas come back to us, determine whether or not the wells, when they were taken over, had any of this type of testing we're talking about, whether they're calibrated. Let's start there, and then see what we got, and then go after that. The next step would be figuring out what's left over and the cost of getting those additional meters calibrated. Does that sound like a way to go?
Does.
All right.
I'll let you know if we end up purchasing.
And when you buy one, I'm sure there's a
Rental fee?
rental fee and a turnkey operation for somebody out there, and more power to you. All right, so we're gonna go now. I'm sorry, we got a little interim Santa Barbara Channel Keepers versus City of Ojai 8B. Anybody commenting on that? I have nothing. If we finally were served, I have no updates, no nothing. Mr. Candy, anything on that?
Yeah, I got an update from the attorney representing the city of Ventura last week, and there's a case management conference scheduled for January 2019, January 17th of next year. The case has been assigned to the complex litigation division of the San Francisco Superior Court. Judge Carnow is the presiding judge. He'll be handling and deciding all the issues from here forward. There's a motion made for a stay of the proceedings to allow SIGMA, to take effect, basically, to allow the GSA to, get going with the SIGMA process and get it in place. And the claim is essentially that the adjudication is going to interfere with that process. That hearing, the attorney for the city didn't have a hearing date for that. She was trying to get a date set with all the parties that would be late February, very early March. So, that's the status. We'll wait to see if the judge is willing to entertain a stay. I can say that in the Las Posas Basin, the court in that adjudication decided not to stay the proceedings on a similar argument, but it doesn't mean that this judge won't decide this differently. The basins are different, the issues are different, and it's really, for the judge to decide. Anyway, that's the status. With regard to pumpers in the basin, she said that the court had not heard their request to approve a form answer, and until the court does that, the pumpers in this basin are not required to make an appearance in the case. So that's likely to be heard at the same time as the stay motion, so late February, early March. Once the court does approve the form of the answer that the pumpers would be then filing, then there would probably be a 30-day, or 60-day requirement for them to actually make their appearances in the case. So, nothing in these things moves quickly at all. And, if the court decides that it's not going to stay the adjudication, it's likely to be, years and years as these issues, one by one, get figured out. I mean, usually one of the first things that happens is the court sits down with the parties and they determine a phasing schedule, right? And they'll have to figure out what issues and what phases will be decided, and how the scheduling will look. And, these things take decades in some cases, and, this is going to be a very complicated one, so there's no reason to think that it's going to get resolved quickly.
Even though SIGMA purports to streamline the adjudication process, it really doesn't, does it? I have a question about the tactics of the stay motion. Obviously, adjudication would interfere with completing the GSP for SIGMA, because if the adjudication took place, the GSP would not be required. Isn't it kind of a counterproductive argument?
We didn't make it.
Well,
I know who did.
the legislature, when it enacted SIGMA and then a year later followed up with the so-called streamlined adjudication rules, made it clear that the adjudication was not to upset or disrupt the SIGMA process.
Really?
SIGMA process reigns supreme. So the agency needs to move forward and do what it needs to do. The adjudication, really what that is intended to do is resolve the water rights issues. So I could see the GSP, being adopted, and then, several years down the road, either through a settlement or through actually litigating water rights, the water rights being decided, and that could have an impact on how the GSP, the GSP may need to be modified to then conform with a later water rights judgment or the physical solution, entered in the adjudication case. So, but the legislature did make it clear that the SIGMA process, it comes first, really, and the adjudication is, if the court is not going to stay the adjudication, the court needs to figure out how to make the two processes work together so there's not a lot of redundancy, additional work, inconsistent type of results, that sort of thing. So the court needs to manage it so that SIGMA is the priority.
Thank you for that explanation. That was worthwhile.
It would seem to me that the SIGMA process requires cooperation among all the parties. And if adjudication is hanging over their head, they're not likely to be very cooperative.
Yeah, well, the SIGMA process does require, stakeholder input, and you'd like to think a level of cooperation. As we're seeing in the Fox Canyon basins, when it comes down to it, and the agency is faced with, adopting and implementing an allocation scheme that, in effect, is, de facto water rights, right? When you have an allocation from a groundwater management agency, it's really, that's how much water you can pump without incurring a surcharge. That's your water right. And if folks don't like how that comes out, their recourse is to go to the courts and have their common law water rights determined and see if they can use the court process to change what the GMA did. So, even though you'd like to think there's cooperation, everybody's going to get together, when it comes down to it, if, in the Upper Ventura River watershed, they're looking at allocating water rights, is in most cases, I think, where a GMA is, issuing allocations and imposing pumping regimes on folks, it's probably going to get sued and will need to be dealt with through the courts ultimately. So anyway, that's, my 2 cents on it, but.
Sounds like you have a long-term employment plan there.
Well, I'm conflicted in this basin.
No, I understand. No,
represent
I'm not blaming you. I could see this going on forever and ever, and I'm glad we have you here to keep track of it for us. Thank you.
I don't think when Sigma was written by water lawyers, and I think, they were licking their chops when they,
I appreciate your explaining it in layman's terms that we can understand. Thank you.
I guess the thing that concerns me is because it's become a litigation issue, all of this is going to be done by attorneys behind closed doors, basically. And the only people that are going to meet from the various parties are going to be attorneys, eventually consultants, the real expensive ones. And it seems to me that there should be some attempt, at least, to get these parties together and start to try to work towards some kind of settlement, even if the settlement ends up in an official adjudication, because we're all talking about the same water. If Ventura gets more water than we think they should have, Casitas will have less water, we'll have less water. So I think it's, and if more water is required to release down the river, we're all going to lose water on that one. So unless there's, the SIGMA process allowed for stakeholders, it allowed for the general public and people who had a stake in this to participate and comment on what's being done. And the adjudication process pretty much shuts that down. I mean, the public process may go on, but, like you said, it's almost like, just an exercise in futility, because at the end, if one party, particularly if it's a major party, isn't happy, they're going to go ahead and litigate. So I just think it's a shame that City of Ventura, Casitas, Ventura River County Water District, Miners Oaks, this organization can't sit down and at least discuss the basic issues and what they think the best outcome of this should be. I mean, if Ventura wants all the water, then we know we're in for a fight, but I don't think that's where they're at. I think the City of Ventura, I've been involved in the City of Ventura's water rights issues for a long time, and it's a 50-year-old problem for them. And I think they see this as the only way that they're going to firm up a supply they think they're entitled to. So understanding what they want and understanding what channel keepers want, I think, is an important part of how we move forward with this. And without any public discussion, it makes it very difficult.
Just quickly in response to that, the streamlined adjudication rules envision the parties getting together and being able to come up with a solution that then they could present to the court and have the court approved. There's a couple of different findings the court has to make to actually, enter judgment based on, the stipulation that the parties reach. But that process does exist. In most adjudications, though, the parties have to feel enough pain to get to the point that they're willing to compromise. And that's usually the way a lot of these things work out. The parties will litigate for 5 or 6 years, go through the first few phases of the adjudication, decide some key issues, and then decide that they've paid their lawyers enough and they want to get the thing resolved. They're serious then about, coming together, reaching a compromise solution, present it to the court, and if it's a fair, equitable solution, then the court will adopt that as the judgment. And that's why, in every basin where this has happened, you end up with a very different looking type of, physical solution. But that opportunity is always there if and when all the parties are ready to get serious and, resolve it. But it takes, compromise, and the city of Ventura is going to have to give up something. The pumpers here in this basin are going to have to give up. Everybody's going to have to give up something to reach that point. So, but it's available to the parties if they want to use it.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's the bottom line. Everyone's going to have less water than they think they should.
Well, if we're all unhappy, that's success. Generally speaking, when I deal with these kind of stuff, if everyone's unhappy with the resolution, that means that everybody didn't get everything they wanted, and we're all going to find a compromise somewhere. I'm sure we'll be hearing more about this. Any other comments about it?
Just remember that even though there may be some evidence to show that the city of Ventura has the rights to X amount of miners inches, which computes to 58,000 acre feet of water, they've got no place to put it. They can't store it. They can't use all that water. That's not a legitimate water right. Sorry.
And with
Rest
that,
your case.
he's rested his case.
Should be easy then.
Know where we're going here.
Easy.
All right.
Right.
8C, conjunctive use agreement. Mr. Bagley, Mr. Kier, who wants to take this and talk about it?
Jordan wants to.
You're right.
Just so before we could just give everybody a general idea, or remind everybody what we're talking about here as far as the conjunctive use before you get too deep into it.
Sure. Conjunctive use is defined as the use of both surface and groundwater resources to meet a given population's demand. Here within the jurisdiction of the OBGMA, we have several small conjunctive use operations in play. Senior Canyon, for example, Thatcher School, Topa Topa Ranch. There's several that divert a certain portion of surface water to meet their needs and conjunctively use that with groundwater. The much larger elephant in the room or the basin is the use of the Casitas lake water as a surface water resource and groundwater within the Ojai Basin. So it stood to reason that with the streamlining of the water purveyor system for the city becoming Casitas, Ojai, that we could much more easily get a conjunctive use agreement in place that would both use the existing stages of drought, the existing stages of basin capacity, the existing stages of Casitas capacity, to come up with a user-friendly conjunctive use agreement that effectively serves as both a surface water and groundwater management tool. It's effectively the crux of this agency's objectives and meets several of the management objectives that are in several generations of groundwater management planning. And what we've done is taken the storage and action table that we were looking at earlier this evening and expanded that several-fold to include the thresholds and action items that will effectively guide how much water is used from Casitas, how much water is used from the basin to meet the demands of the city and the pumpers within the basin. Clear enough?
Clear enough?
Okay.
What did you find?
So to that end, what we've done is after several meetings and expansion of this table, and I alluded to it earlier this evening, we have several input parameters and output parameters that are really the triggers and thresholds and actions that result from it. All boiled down into a relatively simple table that is in draft form now, here and here alone, not yet brought to the agenda package, though we're getting close. We'll describe to you the columns of this table and then the rows of this table accordingly. Columns left to right, precipitation at the valley floor, the San Antonio Creek Spreading Grounds Rehabilitation Project viability, the past calendar year basin low, the trend, are we in a wetting or drying cycle, what the key well depth to water spring high was, what the past calendar year fall low was, and then becomes the storage and action items. What is the Casitas drought stage? 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. What is the Palmer drought stage, which is more of a regional climatic stage of drought, moderate to extremely moist, all the way down to extreme drought conditions. Another key component here of this metric on discharge is the San Antonio Creek surface water discharge. There's also the Casitas condition of the WEEP elevation stages. There's the Ojai Basin condition. There's the actions, and then ultimately the suggested extraction per well. Those are the columns left to right that populate this table. Precipitation, we've got, of the 5 stages that we're talking about here, really wet conditions being greater than 36 inches on the valley floor, a mid-range stage of greater than average, that is 21 inches, to that 36-inch threshold. When we're starting to get into drier conditions, it's 15 to 21 inches of precipitation, then 10 to 15 inches of precipitation, and then the dreaded, very rarely cited,
It didn't rain.
10 inches of rain. And that's important because when it's less than 10 inches of rain and we haven't had the watershed burned, that's when the creeks have some degree of flow. Below that, 10 to 12 inches of precipitation, the creeks typically don't flow at all, across the valley floor at least. San Antonio Creek Spreading Grounds project, we're trying to spread the permitted capacity, which is relatively lower than the physical capacity of the spreading grounds to operate. In almost any time that those certain thresholds are met as far as flow across the San Antonio Creek, across the points of compliance. So we're really spreading the permitted capacity anytime we have 15 or greater inches of rain, and other factors come into play. Cuidado.
Hi, Larry.
Another enthusiastic viewer.
There's also the past calendar year basin low, where in a wet year we have greater than 70% capacity in the basin at the dry point. The wet periods we're looking at a wetting trend and stable trends in the greater than average to that 36-inch rainfall. Key well spring high, in really wet years we're looking at less than 50 feet of a depth to water. That's very rarely occurs. But in moderately to mid-range wetness, we have 50 to 100 feet in the spring high, all the way down to greater than 250 feet in those really dry times. Past calendar year fall lows similarly follow that trend. This Casitas drought stages of 1 through 5, 1 being effectively no drought. That's correlates with a Palmer drought stage of moderately moist to extremely moist conditions. That's 36 inches or more on the valley floor. So really wet conditions. Drought stage 2, mid-range drought, 3, moderate drought, 4, severe drought, and 5, extreme drought. On the San Antonio Creek surface water discharge side, if we've got greater than 10 CFS flowing out of the basin, that's our typical wet period of time. When we have 3 to 10 CFS flowing out of the basin, that's that average to 1.5 average, or 21 to 36 inches of precipitation on the valley floor. When it's drier, we get 1 to 3 CFS, and even drier still, 0.1 to 1 CFS flow. That's how things have been during this past drought, and then dry to 1/10 of a CFS when it's extremely dry. The Casitas conditions, greater than 50% capacity, 40 to 50, 30 to 40, 25 to 30, and less than 25 for their drought stages under the wheat program. In the Ojai Basin condition, going down that column, when we're really wet, when we have greater than 90% capacity or greater than 80,000 acre feet of the key well with a water level spring high shallower than that 50-foot depth. The Ojai Basin condition for the mid-range is 81, which is our long-term average amount of storage over the historic period of record, up to that 90% capacity. Going down into the more drier conditions, below average rainfall, we're in the 64 to 72,000 acre feet or 70 to 80% capacity. In the drying, severe drought periods, we're at 50,000 to 64,000 acre feet in the basin, and then less than 50,000 acre feet in the basin, we're in extreme drought conditions. The actions that we're looking at, when it's really wet, it's going to be better to use groundwater first. The reason being is that the trend of storage within the basin is if we're not using that water, there's no available storage capacity for the basin to accept any recharge, and even in the driest years, some recharge reaches the basin. In the driest years, no water's reaching Casitas. So in excess of the safe yield is okay when those other conditions are met. We could be pumping as much as 10,000 acre feet from this basin under those really wet conditions.
Because we just got to use the water, right? It's just
Because it's there and it's spilling and there's so much water flowing down the creek.
theoretically, Casitas is filling up.
And it's still filling up.
Right. Okay.
Correct. So the suggested extraction per well is effectively one's maximum capacity, with the Casitas Ojai system extracting 5,000 acre feet, effectively meeting all of their demand with groundwater, basin-wide. Under the next drought condition, groundwater remains a primary target, extracting the safe yield. We're targeting that 5,000 acre feet and preparing for reductions because conditions are stable to trending downward. Establishing the baseline year is yet to be done. That's part of what needs to be added to this table, and mimic the extraction of 2,000 acre feet from the Casitas wells. Down into the drier periods, 20% reduction in pumping towards a 4,000 acre foot per year basin-wide extraction target. 80% of the baseline year, Casitas extracting 1,600 acre feet from the basin. Some makeup from the lake. Going downward in the 20% additional stage reduction in pumping, targeting 3,000 acre feet per year. That's when we have that 10 to 15 inch rain year, and the basin capacity is much lower. Finally, we're down in the dregs of the basin. We're extracting a 2,000 acre feet target, equal to what is recharged without rainfall, and going down toward ultimate conservation, that 800 acre feet from the city purveyor system. So that's where that table stands, and I hope that was clear enough and simple enough to at least pick up parts of the gist of where we're heading with this. But ultimately, it's establishing the natural conditions that will become thresholds for action, each of which can be brought into this relatively simple tabulated analytical model from which decisions can be made on extraction.
So when you bring this to us to review it, and it's going to come to us in an 11 by 14 inch paper to accommodate the necessary parameters needed to clarify a complicated and comprehensive issue,
Very good.
can you also do the favor of bringing us some case studies of saying, under this parameter, this is what it would look like in the valley today?
Right.
So that we can so we can understand exactly what that means, so that we can, know what it means.
Right, and I think what we're really looking at is, rather than case studies, we'd be hindcasting the application of these triggers and thresholds to the actions we described, and then correlating them to how things looked in 1983.
Thank you.
1977, 1951, et cetera.
But as important as that is, when we start talking about this stuff in a drought, the reality is everyone's gonna wanna know what it does to them now.
Right.
So that's the biggest question we're gonna get. You know, what happened when I was 5 is nice, but what's happening next year is really the question we're gonna be asked.
Right, and that's why we're relying on both past calendar year trends and past fall years, as well as each spring high and precipitation to forecast what we can for that particular year.
This looks like some sausage making right here.
Law, sausage, and water wells.
Yeah, all right, all right.
Absolutely.
How much more time do you think it's gonna take before you have a draft?
Well, this, our next meeting, we're looking at the end of January. So I think that's plenty of time to have this before the board. The actual time we'll probably spend on it is probably 2 or 3 full days worth of staff time.
Well, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, Russ has been doing all this work, and I'm very interested in this, and I think I might be able to be of at least of some help, maybe ask some of the questions ahead of time that I think may be asked.
You talking about a committee?
Sounds like you're talking to the staff over there, and, you know, you're allowed to do that.
Well, if we have a committee, certainly Richard would be welcome to come along.
Yeah, I'd be willing to help with it. I mean,
Add him to our ad hoc committee for this.
I have no problem with that. I will not be participating in that particular ad hoc committee. I know that you've got me on it, but I need to get out of it.
No, that's a different ad hoc committee.
Oh, okay, all right.
This is another one.
All right, well, do we need to do anything to make that happen, or you just need to invite him?
What you say is, make it so.
Make it so, wave our Harry Potter magic wand, and solve our water problems. So you guys get together and put your input into that, and bring it back to us in January in your big 11/17-inch paper to accommodate the necessary parameters needed to clarify a complicated and comprehensive issue. Is there anything else we would like to discuss this evening?
I just have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't want to catch Jordan flat-footed, but the basin, the water update from the rains and at the beginning of the meeting.
The basin report, number 3.
Yeah, yeah, so Jordan, are you able to backtrack into that, or would you prefer not to tonight?
I can speak to it to some degree. Obviously we've seen some pretty good amount of water flowing this pennies from heaven. We got about 3.5 inches on the ridgetops. We've got about 1.5 inches on the valley floor, and while that makes for nice, good green grass starting to grow on the hillsides and green up, and a couple of creeks starting to flow here and there, we really see a delay in recharge to the groundwater basin by about a month from this. We start to see the real upswing. So our groundwater levels are very similar to how they've been in October, starting to plateau / gently rise, really more as less pumping is conducted. There's less demand on the basin as we literally irrigate from the heavens. And that's a very big component of why we have an annual nadir when we do. So I hope that answers the question, really, that we're in similar shape to where we were in October when the depths to water were just shy of 200 feet in the Key Well. And they're a little bit higher now. I don't have an exact number for you, but things are certainly looking up from here in this season.
So in the minute it said that the basin was at 60% in October.
Yes.
So you're saying it's still there?
It's still there. It's a little bit higher, but not significantly.
Last thing, I wanted to thank Roger Essex for talking about the meters. I didn't mean to pick on you there, sorry. You kind of left you up there, but didn't mean to suggest that was your fault, or anyone's fault. Well, okay, well, you did vote no apparently, but or no one's fault at all. Trying to do the right thing. Anyway, anything else you want to discuss, bring to our attention? When is our next meeting, if I could get, someone can remind me?
January 31st.
Okay, then it is 6:30, and we are adjourned until our next meeting, which is on, I was just told,
January 31st.
January 31st. Thank you very much. Y'all have a good evening and a nice holiday.
Thank you very much.
How do you?
I saw it on the,
Arg.
website, it was
Momentarily ago.
almost 4 on the top of the mountain.
Thank you, Peter.